Good afternoon. This is your host, Guillermo Sabatier, Director of International Services for HSI, and your host for Perspectives on Energy here at ThinkTech Hawaii. And today we'll be discussing infrastructure attacks in the event of war. Thank you. All right, welcome back. And it's been a couple of weeks, but I have been to a tech conference recently, earlier this week, and had a different plan, but the stuff I heard on that conference was rather interesting and that I share with all of you. So I went to the EEI, the Edison Electrical Institute Transmission, Distribution, Metering, Mutual Assistance Conference, and one of the where I had a speaking engagement that discussed the evolution of training for distribution dispatchers. But upon hearing the keynote speakers at the very opening of the actual conference, there's things I heard there that, of course, I was compelled to come back and report to all the listeners here. And definitely was something that was a little bit eye-opening, but something that I had already suspected, and it seemed kind of obvious. But to hear it again from the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and a few other entities over there, just reiterates the fact that this is no longer a mere suspicion, but this is definitely a tangible, credible threat at this point. I'm sure, as all of you may be aware, there's definitely a ongoing military conflict happening in Eastern Europe at this time, and of course with the usual players. And then at the same time, right, China has been sort of assisting, but at the same time staying back a little bit. But we've all known for a while that they always have definitely somewhat of an antagonistic relationship with us, even though they need us as one of the primary consumers. One thing that has been made clear, though, is, and also that I've spoken about in previous episodes, is the fact that they weaponized a lot of our infrastructure changes against us, right? Namely, the whole climate change, carbon emission reduction, renewable energy initiatives, right? They've used that, against us. But one of the things that I heard that was particularly interesting was that the fact that the potential for a coordinated attack in the event of an armed conflict with China or Russia, or in any event, or a combination of these different actors. So. Besides them attacking just military targets, whether it's an attack on Taiwan, attack on Japan, or something that motivates that kind of aggression, one of the things that they for sure would have planned would be an attack at the same time, an attack on American infrastructure and its allies. Most likely, you can rest assured they will attack the electrical infrastructure. So you see so many different phishing emails. I mean, there's thousands of attacks a day in the aggregate form of whether it's phishing emails, attacks on whaling, or even like attempted intrusion into our industry's infrastructure, right? Whether it's our cybersecurity systems. Fortunately, many of those are caught. We have a lot of very, very robust NERC CIP standards that we go against, and of course quite a bit of like best practices. But the attacks are still there, and we're often playing catch up, right, to the latest developments and the science behind these like state-sponsored attacks, right? Now, the other interesting thing as well is that they mentioned was the fact that it wouldn't just be electrical infrastructure. One of the things that they said most likely would be attacked, of course, would be communications, whether it be satellites, for example. That in a conflict, those would be the first few things that within the first few hours of an attack, right, or a conflict. That's one of the things they will go after primarily, of course, is those communication satellites. The next thing they would attack as well, and probably at the same time, it would be the transportation, logistics as well, right? Or even the food transportation, right? So you imagine being able to get food out to different people, millions of people across the nation. That will definitely have an impact, right, on the population and society in general. The other thing that way they fear will be an attack on would be, of course, water supplies, and that's a really quick way to really like render a population pretty much defenseless and bring it down to its knees. And of course, the other situation that we've seen interesting things happening when we saw it last year was an attack on the pipelines, whether it's fuel or fuel oil or anything that involves energy as well, right? So as you can see, that those sorts of attack, of course, would involve transportation. And then we're also seeing different things that what could happen if there's only a minor disturbance or a disruption in our logistics chain, whereas whether it's food or transportation of goods, you see how that becomes disruptive, right, to everyday life. It can only be amplified many more times if it's a coordinated attack across a widespread area. So definitely, what would be the goal, right, in attacking the population in this way, right? You're not really killing people, but you're basically making life for people very, very uncomfortable and perhaps painful. And then if it goes on long enough, perhaps fatal. So one of the things I would hope for is one of the objectives here, it's believed, according to intelligence, is the fact that they would want to do this to break the will of the people to continue to fight. Now, of course, you take certain comforts away from the general population. I can rest assure you that probably a little bit less than half of them will want to capitulate and maybe pressure the government or at least the current administration to give in. But I have a strong feeling that we may be often divided as Americans, but you give us something to hate, and that will be something to fear altogether. And that will be something that everybody can rally against, and it'll be a harder time for whatever adversary is. To continue or press an attack. Now that's for land invasion, but if they said, for example, to just really disrupt infrastructure, that will definitely have a profound impact and to disrupt what we're doing here. So how would they carry out this attack? In other words, right? What's the next thing they discussed? One of the things they brought up, of course, was there's usually these very well protected, highly valuable critical assets, right? Whether it's a facility, it's a substation, it's a large set of refineries, or even large pipelines, right? So usually the way they would probably attack these won't be, in years past, there was always the fear of like the electromagnetic pulses. We as an industry got a lot better at protecting against that. So that threat is no longer as likely as it was before. Even if the threat was launched, you probably wouldn't see its effects as catastrophic as it was predicted, mainly because of the fact that there's a lot of hardening that's been put in place to avoid that. Now, what they said is the definite looming danger here are the hypersonic missiles and those hypersonic weapon systems in this case. There's a variety of those, and sadly, we've fallen a little bit behind in that development compared to these other nations. So more than likely, right, it is something that is pretty much impossible to stop or very difficult to defend against. They can target, a few key critical facilities, and then if we have very few key targets that they can go against, that's likely what they will pursue first. Now, how do we mitigate against this, right? And one of the things that they discuss, right, as far as the infrastructure goes, and it falls back on my previous discussions, really is rather than having a few very important, very well protected eggs in a basket, you should have a lot of eggs all throughout the place, relatively well defended. But the fact of the matter is that there's so many of them that, and it's all network integrated and tied, that losing a significant number of them won't really have an overall impact on the whole network of a system, which, as I said before, right, having the distributed energy resources, having a lot of intelligence behind the way our networks are connected, and having an infrastructure that is really well spread out, such that no few facilities become that vital they can take us out, but rather everything is spread out so well that everything's important, but in reality, nothing's really that important. So in that case, for example, they simply wouldn't have enough weapons to go against everything to actually render it that incapacitated. So that was one of the solutions that they suggested. How we accomplish that is not something that can be done short term. One of the main things really is whether you have a lot of small generation resources spread out throughout the country, whether it's in city centers, suburban, or even off in rural areas. Usually having enough of those around is something that could definitely guarantee the ability for our grid to be more resilient. And I'm just talking about the electric infrastructure. Everything else, communications, that's something that likely will be vulnerable in this case, and that's something that would likely knock out and affect how we communicate and function as an economy, society, and a population, and even as a nation. But as far as electrical infrastructure goes, that one solution is that, right, when it comes to but that's kind of far off. Having those resources spread out and having those, an example of that, small modular reactors will be highly reliable and deployable in large numbers. The thing is, we're quite a few years away from that becoming a reality. The other challenge here is distributed energy resources. Having a lot of those deployed around, really, it's once again, will take some time. And it's not just a time issue, but it's also the bandwidth required to monitor and control all of these devices, right? Being integrated into a larger type of integrated system. It's already pretty taxing for our current control system to manage, for example, a transmission grid. Imagine a distribution network with far more, many orders of magnitude greater of number of nodes. That becomes a whole different processing challenge there when it comes to that regard. But I think it's possible in this case, especially after last week's episode when I was discussing the whole broadband for all opportunity. So in this case, that's thankfully as something that it might be completed in maybe a couple of years. And then DERs might definitely prove quite the asset when it comes to having all of these eggs spread out all over the country, and thus making one big important target, less visible in this case. So what are the other things that can be done regarding this, right? So eventually, they don't have enough hypersonic missiles to go after everything. They don't have a lot of space-based weapons to go after all the satellites. They will have to, engage in an armed conflict far off from our shores, but maybe possibly close to shore to our very, very territories. But eventually, for example, one of the things that we can do now firsthand is to make sure we practice very good cybersecurity hygiene, right? And be very careful with how we behave and how we as we've been trained in the past, right? One of the biggest threats really are phishing attempts, clicking on that link where you get emails, right? And that's the most common attack that we see all the time. And in most cases, for example, that vulnerability is usually exploited, and then they'll be in your system for months at a time before the attack is launched. Now, we saw that many years ago when Russia attacked the Ukraine the first and the second time. Fortunately, now their cybersecurity systems are far more resilient, and I've yet to hear of a cyber attack being successful on the Ukrainian power grid. Now, they've had physical attacks where they've actually directly bombed and damaged and destroyed some of their facilities, but their grid is mostly intact still at this point. So that is definitely a testament of how that particular defense can be mounted against those type of cyber attacks. But these attacks, of course, are well known and they're nothing new. So it's a matter of making sure we maintain that kind of tempo and awareness and alert and readiness against those sorts of cyber attacks, because it can be something as simple as an email where they're posing as your HR department asking you to click on a link to update some kind of information, or the other attacks where they're even coming after your personal messaging on your mobile device. So a lot of that is happening as well. I know I get like eight attempts a day at least on some of these text messages, and at least another a dozen emails, all trying to go after try to exploit some kind of cyber vulnerability. And I'm not even working for utility. I'm just a company that provides training for utilities. So that tells you what kind of level of how far they've gotten down the chain, the supply chain, when it comes to cyber attacks. The other thing that was concerning was as well was that for the most part they've done away with a lot of the vulnerabilities with the Chinese chipsets in a lot of our relaying and communication devices. But that still remains a problem in some parts of the country, and definitely a problem in most of the world. A lot of that equipment is still out there, and definitely presented a cybersecurity issue when it came to the managing the grid infrastructure and grid operations. So definitely that is something that we are always concerned with. But as far as that goes, that's something that I definitely wanted to share based on this show, that based on that keynote speech that we heard on the first day, the first hour of the actual conference, the first thing he talked about. So for me, it's definitely a concern. And It wasn't something I figure I just kind of cover later on. I just wanted to make sure that it was fresh and share with all of you. I'm sure we're going to hear more about this in the next coming months, which I thought was interesting because just last night here at home at 4:45 in the morning, they ran a test of the emergency broadcast system or the emergency alert system on our cell phones, which is odd because the entire state received the entire state of Florida received this test message of the emergency broadcast system, and it was a loud alert. You could have had your phone on silent, do not disturb, and I was deep in sleep, and I heard that jarring alarm go off, and then my wife got an alarm on hers as well, maybe like 30 seconds later, because she's on a whole different network. I'm on AT&T, she's on Sprint, and pretty much everybody in the state got that alert at that time. So they woke up the entire state with this test system. So, and then it appears that from now on, every other month, we're going to get this test once every 2 months. So definitely an interesting thing. The UK is doing the same thing as well, and I think they may have done something similar in Canada. I don't know about other states and what sort of testing protocol they have at this time, but I can definitely tell you that this is the first time I ever see one of those alerts of the emergency alert or emergency broadcast system on my mobile device being issued at 4:45 in the morning on a Thursday morning. So to me, that was definitely new and something that we should all pay attention to, because definitely there's something changing, and to have the DoD and the DOE make that kind of like declaration at a conference is something as for the industry is definitely something that caught my attention. So, and again, last night, this once again reinforces it that it's definitely a concern. So anyway, I will have more information on this hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and I'll share that in a later episode. But I'm going to make today's episode a little shorter in this case because it wasn't a lot more to report. But again, this kind of reinforces a discussion I've had in the past that in order to meet our carbon zero emissions goals, right, by the end of the decade, DERs are going to be really important, but then so will small modular reactors. And even to some degree, for example, clean natural gas, right, that we're still keep using. But natural gas will be vulnerable, especially with those pipelines, to a cyber attack or even a direct physical attack, right, using these hypersonic missiles. So SMRs, small ones deployed all throughout the country, will be vital, as well as distributed energy resources, to make sure we have all of our assets spread out and not no one place becoming too valuable a target or vulnerable from that regard. So anyway, thank you all again. If you have any comment, please like and subscribe, or leave any comments. I'll try and respond to those as soon as I can. I usually see these on YouTube, but we'll also have it on the ThinkTech channel as well. So anytime you want to leave a comment or email directly, please go ahead. I invite you to do that, and I will more than happily get back to you as soon as I possibly can. I always invite conversation. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk to you again in a few weeks. Have a good night.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.